Hello, friends, and welcome to the latest in our Agility Martech series webinars, how composable DXPs are disrupting legacy platforms. And I'm really happy today to be joined by Kaya Ismail. Welcome, Kaya.
Hey, Joel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so my name is Joel Vardy. I'm CTO here at Agility. We do these webinars every couple of weeks to try and keep people up to speed with what's going on in the industry now. And composable DXPs are something we've been talking about for quite some time. And really just understanding how they've started disrupting legacy platforms is the topic we're going to handle today. So let's jump right into it. Actually, first, Kaya, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'll try and keep it very, very short and sweet. I'm the founder of Wordify and also DXP Report. Wordify is a content marketing agency specifically for the DXP and Headless space. And DXP Report is a project we launched a couple of years back as a newsletter, which is now a podcast and a website, dxpreport.com. And as the name implies, it's the sort of news conversation hub for the space, for the Headless DXP space. So you can find us rounding up news, giving opinions, insights, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Yeah, I follow all that material, and I find it really interesting how the concept of DXP used to be, I think, pretty boring. 2 or 3 years or 5 years ago, and it started to get really exciting. And this is one of the things that we're talking about today, especially with regards to enterprise, which is I kind of like, how could enterprise software be exciting? And it kind of is. Mm-hmm. So what will we be talking about today and learning today? So number one, what is composable DXP? Kaya's going to tell us about that versus, what's legacy DXP. We're going to talk about the pivot away from legacy that we think is happening. And we'll talk a little bit about, why is enterprise embracing the idea of composable DXP and kind of leading that shift. So let's jump into the material. First question, what is composable DXP versus legacy?
Yeah, so I always like to start with the legacy and the monolith, right? Before we actually jump into what's disrupting that, what's changing that. So I've given a lot of examples and metaphors over the years. I think I gave one the last time we had a webinar as well. Right now, I'm feeling the Swiss Army knife metaphor, okay? So with a monolithic or legacy, those two terms are interchangeable, synonymous. With a legacy DXP, you've got a Swiss Army knife, right? You've got one product that has multiple sort of tools attached to it. So you've got the screwdriver, you've got a knife, you've got a chisel, maybe you've got a saw blade. You've got all these different things attached to it. It all comes in one package, but those individual pieces, the knife, the saw, the screwdriver, they're definitely not the best screwdriver on the market, right? They're not the best knife on the market. They're packaged together for convenience. You can whip out your pocket and you've got these different tools there, right? In a similar way, a monolith or a legacy DXP is a packaged product, an all-in-one product where your personalization, your analytics, your CRM perhaps, all of it, obviously the website content management, all of that is packaged together in under one product or under one company, shall we say, multiple products under one company, and they're sort of tightly coupled together. It's very difficult to break them apart or to integrate them with other systems in a non-rigid way. And you end up paying for that one large product with, those sort of products bundled in there within that are not necessarily market-leading products, right? And I think that's fair to say pretty much across the board. And on top of that, it's difficult to then replace those individual pieces with other sort of, best-of-breed products that could potentially replace them. Because guess what? You just spent a whole bunch of money buying the entire product. So it kind of defeats the object of doing what you just did, right? So you end up being stuck. Yeah, you end up being stuck with this big Swiss Army knife that can get the job done, but for sure, the knife and the screwdriver and the saw blade are not the best you can get. Yeah, absolutely not the best you can get. So that's what a legacy platform is, right? Think of a Swiss Army knife. Now think, okay, instead of buying a Swiss Army knife, I'm going to individually buy, because I only need the screwdriver, the knife, and the saw, right? So I'm going to go out and buy the best screwdriver, the best knife, the best saw. I'm going to spend some time on YouTube and Google, checking out the reviews, checking out which one is actually the best on the market right now, and I'll buy the best one, and I'll put them in my toolbox, and I can use them as and when I need. They're in the same place. They can work together if I need them to. They can work separately if I need them to. If my screwdriver gets old or I dislike it, I can swap it out, put a new one in my toolbox. Same with all the other pieces of the puzzle. And now you've got a composable DXP, right? You've got a DXP that instead of coming all as one package together for you, built for you, you've got something now that you can individually select okay, the personalization engine, I'm going to select this product. This Headless CMS, I want agility in this case. The CDP, analytics, you can go and choose the absolute best products in each of these industries, making up your own personalized, custom, bespoke ecosystem, which is a composable DXP, because you can compose that, you can change it, swap things around, only pay for the things you want, only pay for the things you need. So yeah, hopefully that metaphor makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really interesting just to talk about how, the idea of being able to swap out those services as your business evolves and as the new tools come around with different versions and things like that.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of legacy systems are on premise. They're older, they're not necessarily built to work on cloud, whereas the composable services tends to be more SaaS type products that you can sort of, a lot easier to try out and get going really quickly on. Exactly. And then a lot easier to sort of just use as a service. You just pay a fee. You don't have to worry about versions. You don't have to install anything, that sort of thing. So,
exactly. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I always look at is this idea of the digital experience platform especially for things like MarTech, it can be composed of those SaaS services. And that's how we get that composable idea that you've been talking about.
Awesome. Exactly. Yeah. And again, it just so happens, that's where the world has gone over the last 5 to 10 years. The very best products in all of these different spaces are SaaS, right? Because of the benefits of SaaS, which is a totally different topic. But yeah, that has become the trend. And if you are out there looking at the best CRM, for example, it's going to more than likely come as a SaaS package, right? Which again allows you to have these different SaaS products as microservices. Again, it's not the traditional use of the word microservice, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
These different SaaS products become your microservices within this broader DXP. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of them are, I hear the word headless. It used to be we'd only hear the word headless around CMS. Now we're starting to hear the word headless, in the conversation of things like e-commerce and personalization. And do you think that term is becoming really prevalent within the sort of the DXP realm as well?
It's so interesting to me because it almost gives us a little window into how language is formed. Because again, as we just saw with microservices, it doesn't technically, the traditional definition of a microservice doesn't really apply to a SaaS product, right? And yet this is the way it's evolved. Similarly, you can't really have a headless personalization platform, really. I mean, it doesn't really make sense in the traditional sense of the word headless. But because of this term has gained popularity, it's become sort of the buzzword of the industry that these personalization platforms are trying to get a slice of. That's how they're instead of calling themselves API first or API driven, they're saying we're headless, we're headless compatible maybe. And that's just kind of the way language goes, I guess. But it definitely is becoming more prevalent across different industries. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so we're starting to hear DXP, composable DXP, headless, all kind of part of the same conversation. So that's really good. So we kind of framed out where we're at. And just talking about the shift away from the Swiss Army knife, away from this legacy monolithic type of a platform, do you think we're at the beginning of this pivot, and kind of where are we at in the story of moving to composable DXP?
I think we are definitely in the very beginning of the pivot. I think it's important to say right now, before I dive into what I'm about to dive into, that we are very early, right, in this pivot. The vast majority of enterprises and even medium-large companies are using a legacy system, are using a monolithic system, using maybe in many cases on-premise systems, right? And we are very, very early in that transition, but there's no doubt now that transition is happening, and that transition is going to happen. And the legacy monoliths are going to be, at some stage, the secondary option in the market / the dead option in the market. And one evidence of that is Sitecore's recent announcement that they are also pivoting away, like quite publicly and openly. That's why I'm saying publicly and openly. They're moving away from that, right? And they're trying to embrace the DXP architecture. But their problem is, of course, that that's not their nature. They're going to have a long transition period to make that. That's a different story altogether. But the fact that, again, Sitecore, which is a traditional monolithic legacy platform, has openly said that they're going to try and make that pivot. It's going to take them a long time to do it, but the fact that they've said it is evidence that even these players are now seeing that their strategy is not the correct one, and they have to change. So the fact that the pivot is here is undeniable at this stage.
Yeah, it's really interesting that as we're a headless CMS vendor, we've been trying to sort of promote the idea of a decoupled system and things like that, all the kind of benefits that you talked about with composable DXP. In the last 18 months, those conversations have stopped being driven as much by us and are starting to be driven more by the customers coming to us or developers and partners coming to us and talking about more about the specifics about how the implementation of agility is going to work in terms of a composable DXP, which is a much better conversation to have than, oh, you should really look at the idea of headless CMS or the idea of composable DXP. So I think we're getting in a little bit more mature in our conversations about how we pivot, which has been very helpful.
Yeah, I'm more educated customer for sure for you guys. That's for sure.
Yeah. And this is one of the ways that I like the kind of honeycomb visualization. And this isn't by any means a comprehensive list of all the different kinds of services that can be part of a composable DXP. We tend to put headless CMS in the middle because I feel that everything revolves around your content. So it's a headless CMS centric view of the world. But you can see things like CRM and form capture, digital asset management and personalization, commerce is sort of a big component there. What's your feel on these kind of diagrams and sort of what people tend to sort of pick and choose as the things that are most common in their composable DXPs?
Yeah, I think this one does a good job of like the most sort of popular sort of components. And I think you're right to put headless CMS in the middle. The only other one that could be is like, the foundational piece could be argued to be commerce, especially if obviously it's just a purely commerce-based company. But I've seen other sort of personalization, CRM platforms they themselves are acknowledging that in this DXP ecosystem, they are not necessarily the foundational piece. They are there to complement and add functionality to the headless CMS.
Right.
So we've seen that in quite a few examples of for example, personalization engines integrating with headless CMSs, integrating with headless CMSs, because they understand that role. And there's nothing necessarily, hierarchical about it. I hope that's pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
It's just the way businesses are built, right? Content comes first, and then your forms come and you personalize the content. You can't personalize content without the content, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and the other side of it too, you talk about personalization. There's kind of one platform that's not on here that we're starting to see is kind of like an orchestration platform or data orchestration platforms where they can bring data from all of these different services together and perform like that bespoke microservice for a specific company. So that's another one that we're starting to see some folks have, especially like building your GraphQL data structures for you, that kind of thing.
Kind of like a data fabric, like over the top of this whole thing. Yeah, that's a good point. That's true. For the enterprises, that's very true. And I wouldn't be surprised to see some more integrations coming that way again via the headless CMS route for sort of these sort of data analytics, big data platforms. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, and we were just doing a tabletop exercise the other day where we drew a diagram like this, and then we said, okay, let's just pick some of the top 2 or 3 enterprise vendors as opposed to like of all the vendors, and that's a much smaller list of platforms that focus specifically on enterprise. Are you starting to see that from your point of view too, where you see there's a lot of like developer type specific products where they're sort of maybe open source or they have lower pricing or whatever? Are you starting to see more of a shift towards enterprise specific type products and services?
Yes, I think that's the general trend of the entire industry, to be honest. Even, I mean, you mentioned there tools that sort of started out more developer focused. They have started to embrace sort of non-developer type UI, UX tooling, because they recognize now that, okay, in order to actually make inroads in the enterprise space, we need to be more than just a dev tool. We need to be a tool that speaks to the CMO and their team and the CEO, and to the CFO. We need to be a tool that's, it's got at least optionally a lot of functionality, right? So it shouldn't just be a tool specifically for the devs, because then now there's a new headache of what to get to for the marketers and the content authors. Yeah. So it's definitely a trend across the board that I'm seeing. The platforms that didn't have those sort of marketer-facing tools are now racing to implement them and sort of launch them. And the ones that didn't have this sort of marketer and CEO-facing messaging similarly are doing the same thing. So
Right. Yeah. So the target market is slightly evolving as well.
Yes.
Cool. I kind of jumped ahead a little bit in the segue for this. So like, why do you think enterprise is really starting to embrace? We talked about enterprise, some of these services are starting to target enterprise more and more. But why do you think enterprise itself is embracing composable DXP as a concept and as a thing that they're kind of building their business around now?
Yeah. So this is the thing, right? It's almost as if and I've heard this a few times from a few different vendors. They're seeing the enterprises come to them, right? Obviously through good marketing and sales from my perspective, but also because they're motivated, right? These enterprises are motivated to leave these monolithic suite platforms because they're no longer serving their interests, and the Headless CMS space is a much. Well, I'm going to go for the reasons why now, actually. So there's 3 reasons that come to the top of my mind all the time. There's multiple. These 3, I think, have the most explanatory scope. So the first is these brands don't want to put their digital experience in all in one. They want to trust one company with that experience, right? So, a Dior, for example, they don't want to just trust a Sitecore, to be frank, with their entire digital ecosystem anymore. Not because they're untrustworthy, but because trusting one company to perhaps, serve every sort of dimension of your company, again, personalization, analytics, commerce, CDP, all these different aspects and dimensions of the company, to trust one company to do all of those, it doesn't make a ton of sense from a flexibility standpoint. It doesn't make a ton of sense from that Swiss Army knife standpoint. Again, you're not going to get the best tools for each dimension of your business if you're just trusting one company to build all those tools.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, so it comes down to like a trust perspective of what tools they really want to work with moving forward in the future.
Yeah, and again, I've used Dior and the Sitecore as 2 examples. I have no idea if Dior and Sitecore have any sort of thing going on. Yeah. I'm just using them as examples. And again, when I see an alternative where, okay, we can actually select now, we can actually go and choose the best tools for each dimension of our company, each dimension of our business, each touch point in the customer experience. Suddenly, you don't have to just put all your eggs in one basket anymore, right? You don't have to trust one company to give you a cutting edge experience from every touch point, every step of the way, right? When, common sense points to the fact that one company probably can't give you 17 different products that are all at the very top of their respective industries, right? Just, it doesn't happen. And we know it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's one perspective, right? The other perspective is cost, right? Buying an all-in-one suite is expensive, right? They're not known for being cheap. Implementing it is expensive. Maintaining it is expensive. Very often I've come across companies who are spending a lot of money just on an agency to maintain the product.
Yes.
Don't worry about the product licensing fees, things like that. Just purely on maintenance. So these things are expensive to implement and maintain. And again, comparing it to a composable ecosystem, you can strip things away that you don't need. So rather than paying for the entire product suite of a monolith or a legacy system, with composable, you can say, okay, for Q2 and Q3, we only actually need the personalization engine and the commerce engine and the forms. We actually don't need the CRM and the CDP for that, for example, right? So you can delay investing in that. You can invest in that as you scale, right? You don't have to buy the whole cake today when you're not going to eat the whole cake. So the cost just work from multiple ways, to be honest with you. Even if you did buy the whole cake in a composable ecosystem, you could work it in a way that's much cheaper than a monolithic one. So that's point 2. And point 3 is, again, choosing those best tools, right? And this is like something that I'm still coming back to. Less about trusting that original monolith, and more about just having the flexibility to keep changing them, right? To keep changing as you scale, to keep changing them as a new marketing automation system has just released last month. We think it's great. We want to use that one now instead of the old one we have.
Right.
If you're on a suite system, don't even bother bringing it up in the boardroom, right? It's not possible. We've just spent millions of dollars on our system. Don't even bother. But in a composable system, that's much more feasible, right? Much more feasible. Yeah. So having that flexibility to pick and choose and scale up and scale down, which is also just as important, is massive for an enterprise company. So yeah, those are the 3 reasons which I sort of keep coming back to.
Yeah. So you're looking at why enterprise is kind of moving to that, and it's interesting too. Like all of Agility's marketing is like 99% inbound. Just reaching out to being reached out to from these companies that want to change how they do business and how they present their digital properties, for sure. And all that kind of, it just really comes down to trust in what they want. This is a really interesting quote from Gartner from, I think, a couple of years ago. They kind of coined this composable DXP term with the idea of application leaders struggling with the cumbersome, time-consuming integrations of rollouts of monolithic DXPs. And I think that, those three reasons that you've got really pull that concept apart of that struggle that enterprise have now with a one-size-fits-all Swiss Army knife type of a project that they want to do. And so breaking it down into smaller chunks, using best of breed tools that they can trust is really how they're kind of going there. And it certainly is a big shift in the industry. Just talking a little bit about agility, because I am CTO at Agility, how can agility give you a head start in the composability race? And I think that the idea of an omni-channel content hub is something that people keep coming to Agility for, and having that to maintain most of all one or more websites. The idea is they have multiple digital properties out there, and they want to have a content hub or multiple content hubs for that. And Agility does a great job. And I think that's the whole idea of Headless CMS is it kind of becomes the hub of your composable DXP. It's kind of the first service. And a lot of people are really happy with the idea that if it wasn't the first service, because I often ask folks, hey, wait, what other tools do you have? Do you have any, commerce tools that have headless services? Or do you have, what's the CRM that you're currently using? Because oftentimes those will often work really well with Agility. And so the idea of an enterprise marketplace for apps that bring together Agility plus the other tools is something that we came out with as a concept last year. And we've seen more and more apps start to sort of get created, both first party by us and by our customers and partners. And I think the question you had, Kaya, was like, hey, which ones do you have? What apps are out there? And it's really interesting that this kind of has evolved based on customer demand. I think the first one we built was Cloudinary, because we had some customers that were coming to us say, hey, we already use Cloudinary, or we're thinking of using that, but how could that work with Agility? So we created a Cloudinary app as a reference for how to work with any DAM system. So, and a couple of partners have actually created third-party apps that do that as well. We've got, integrations with Salesforce. So to basically pull form information from your website into Salesforce to capture leads and conversions, things like that. We did ones with Typeform and with FormStack. I think we've got another one that's basically is more just a block editor. So the idea is you want to change completely how your people are working with content. You can use a block editor if you want. So that's on the Agility website, and that list is growing of the type of marketplace for apps that's available. On the other side of it is just the idea of scalability, security, and one of the biggest ones is single sign-on. The idea of almost all of these composable services now have the ability for you to sign on in a single sign-on type of way. Really works well, so that you don't have to have new passwords for all the different services. I think that's one of the biggest worries, is that folks think that they're going to have to give up some kind of security or some kind of reliability and scalability. But you actually get a lot more of that now with these much more modern services that are SaaS hosted. And that's how Agility works. Cool. Kaya, any closing thoughts from you?
The only other question I've got is, can you let us in with some information on any new apps that are coming to Agility? Any leads on that?
Yeah, I think, well, we've got our starters that are based on, they have commerce. We've got a commerce starter that we did with the team with Vercel, where you can use Shopify or BigCommerce as sort of headless commerce packages. It's interesting that neither of those products are direct for enterprise. There's a couple other enterprise sort of e-commerce, headless commerce packages that are starting to evolve, but we're going to build deeper integrations with those. So you can already do them sort of on the back end side, but we're going to build that front end integration as well. We also have a whole new UI facelift coming out this year that is going to making these integrations a lot easier, because they'll have the new Agility design system called Plenum that we're also releasing this year. That no one knows about that yet. So I just announced it on a webinar. So
amazing.
Thanks for asking that question, Kaya.
No problem. That's great. Excellent. Looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, it is. It's a very exciting time to be in what was actually a pretty boring industry maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's becoming it is a race to sort of understand what is the best for your business, to try and find that. And I find it to be a really exciting space to be in.
It really is. And just last question, because I know we're sort of running over time. Not last question, last statement. The reason it's getting interesting for me and exciting for me is because it's, again, all these different components, from personalization, CDP, with the DXP concept, they're now all becoming one larger industry, right? Where it's like, okay, we have to work together, we have to integrate together now. And those integrations have to be great too, not just like a surface level integration. So yeah, it was really exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for joining us today, Kaya. Really appreciate it. And thanks for you for joining us in the audience. For certain, we want to continue this conversation. Definitely follow Agility at Agility CMS. Follow Kaya, DXP Report. I think it's dxpreport.com, right?
Correct. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely learn more from Agility with these webinars. agilitycms.com/events, or you can just directly email me, joel@agilitysms.com. I still like getting emails. It's still good.
Yeah. Feels good, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you, Kai, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.